Welcome everybody. This is going to be I don't know, an hour long of a little background on San Rita Hills, a little background on the actual blocks that we're going to be tasting, and then obviously we're going to go into the individual wines. But if you guys have them open or have one of them open or whatever, please don't wait for me to get to the actual wines before you guys can smell and taste. This is, I mean, I think we're all done with work for the day, and maybe you guys are home cooking, eating, whatever. Definitely start enjoying the wine. So, yes, as you guys know, Kayleen, who is our wine club manager, among other things. She's the one that put this together. So first and foremost, thank you, Kayleen, for putting all this work together. You guys will see this presentation. She spent many hours on it, getting it just perfect. So thank you, Kayleen. Okay, so here we go. This is going to be, we're going to start off with a little bit of some background on what makes this area special, but also, we're still in the middle of harvest. What is it, the 23rd today of October? We're about, I don't know, all the Pinot Noir is in. We're almost finished with Chardonnay, and there should be a little bit of a gap of about a week or two, maybe three, depending on the weather. And then we'll get into Syrah and then do the little bit of Grenache that we have this week, or yeah, even today. It's been quite warm here, which is unseasonably warm. But next week, just looking at the forecast, it's pretty crazy how cold it's supposed to be, like high of 62 for a couple days. So that's what may delay that kind of, ripening of Syrah or whenever that comes in. But whatever, we're here. Harvest is always quite long for us anyways, because of this, magical climate we're in, of cold sunshine. So let's go ahead and get started on the little bit of the harvest slides that we have. Do I go? I'm sorry, I was waiting for you. Okay, so here we go. A couple new additions this year. We've got Garrett, the San Diego Padre fanatic, in the middle. He's the our assistant winemaker now. He was hired about, I don't know, 5 months ago. He comes from San Diego, obviously, but he spent the last couple of years up in Napa working at Cake Bread. Super enthusiastic, hardworking, very coachable young man who is very passionate about this. And then the two guys to each side of him, Clint and Dallas, there are our harvest interns, and they are working out really well, and it's super fun. We're doing some long hours, lots of hard work. It's pretty crazy how busy it is. The weeks just fly by, but these guys are really, really big help. And then there's Lee, who there's a photo of later on, and he's been with me forever. And then there's myself. So the five of us are the group putting it all together for you guys, for us this year. We pick at night, as you guys may know. The night picking is really important because the fruit comes in nice and cold. So, we take advantage of that. We learned in '04 that vintage was quite hot, and picking fruit during the day in the heat is not good for anything. It's not good for the crew. It's not good for the fruit. And so we decided after that vintage that everything would be done at night. It sucks waking up super early in the morning, but once you're up, you're up. And so it works out. This is, basically, the production side of it, right? And so right here we're pointing out not just, doing the punch downs, which is, taking the cap, like during fermentation for reds, all the skins and the stems and the seeds, they float to the top because of the CO2 gas and the heat that's pushing it up there. And it kind of forms like a cap, an ice cap, if you will. And in order to kind of get the proper extraction, which is the liquid extracting from the solids, we need to take that cap and push it back down into the liquid. We do it twice a day. We do it first thing when we get here super early in the morning, and then we do it right before we leave to go home in the afternoon. And it's all done by hand. And that's really kind of, what we're pointing out here. It's really important, because a machine can't think, a machine can't smell or taste. And so by doing it with the human touch, it's just a huge advantage. Obviously, it's a lot of work to do it. You can't really do it if you have fermentations that are in a bigger vessel than ours. Ours are quite small. They're only 1.5 tons each, which is just kind of big enough to where you can still do this by hand. The picture to the right is just an example of, actually, it's the last fermenter we got in of Pinot Noir from Rancho Nuevo, which we'll be tasting in a little bit, or hopefully you guys have already started. This process here is showing you guys some of the destemming that we do on the left, and that is, you guys know that we're big fans of whole cluster. Whole cluster is a big part of what we do, and but we don't whole cluster everything. We do destem some fruit, and so that's the destemming machine right there that I'm feeding the fruit into Lee. And the picture to the right, or the video to the right, is pressing off Pinot Noir. It's just kind of a fun, cool video, but nonetheless, we're in Pinot Noir pressing stage right now for harvest. Lots of coffee, right? Lots of, we're at work at 4 a.m. here. The crew starts usually at 12:31 a.m. The harvest crew, the vineyard crew, sorry. But there's just, the days are bookended by punch downs, but then in between that is all this other stuff, the lab work, the cleaning, the tasting, the sampling, all that stuff. And it's our favorite time of the year, no doubt. There's just because there's so much action going on, and we have a list every morning on the dry erase board that we just cross off, and then every morning brand new list. And so it's kind of this really cool sense of accomplishment. And these are just some of the things that we do. We're not big lab heads here. The science part of winemaking is really important, but it's fairly, it's just enough to kind of be dangerous, right? I mean, most of what we do, what my approach to winemaking is intuitive. It's all about kind of gut feel and knowledge of the past and the present, and the future. And we use a little bit of the chemistry, the science, to kind of back up what we think we know. But wine is always a blend of the two. For us, it's way heavier on the side of art than it is science. There is just another picture of more topping off barrels and punch downs and lots of cleaning. There's Lee to the right there, filling some barrels. If you guys do come up at any time, we're always here 7 days a week doing something with harvest. So you guys are welcome to check some of this stuff out if you are obliged. This next one is, a little bit of what it looks like. Obviously you guys can't smell this, but at least you get a sense of what things actually look like. So the far left is just like command center, I guess. That's where we keep all of our tools, and a lot of action is always taking place there, mostly because of that sink. But to the right, there's the stems and the skins after pressing Chardonnay. So that's what it actually looks like after it's been pressed. So just a little reminder, when we're harvesting or making Chardonnay, it comes straight out of the vineyard and it goes straight into the press. And so we turn it into juice right away, where obviously the red doesn't get pressed off until after fermentation, right? So that's, again, just a picture of what the skins and the seeds and the stems look like after pressing. The one in the middle is an active Chardonnay fermentation. So it's taken from the top, looking down, kind of give you the sense of like the foam that the yeast creates. And then the one on the right is a post-fermentation of Pinot Noir. So that's about to get pressed off. So we'll turn that into the liquid and then go straight into the barrel. And then it sits in the barrel room right behind me for a year and a half, 2 years. It depends on what kind of wine it is. So now we're going to get to the wines. By the way, if you guys have any questions along the way, please pop them into that chat box. And Kayleen's what's that? The question box. Kayleen is monitoring that. And so at any time, please drop in those questions. We're going to walk you through now a little bit of the vineyard and kind of orient yourselves of like where this stuff actually comes from. And then we'll get into the actual tasting notes. So this is a really cool slide. I wanted to point out, 18, 20 million years ago, Santa Barbara, or where we are presently, used to be right alongside San Diego. And obviously California, there's got a lot of tectonic movement, but this is a really good slide to show you exactly what's happened the last 20 million years. And most importantly, it shows you where and how this mountain range that we always talk about, the Santa Rita Hills being transverse, right? It's east to west going straight to the ocean, how it was created and why we are really, why we're where we are, why we are where we are. That's easy to say. So this is, done by this professor down at UC Santa Barbara, Dr. Outwell, and put this together, and it's quite interesting. Then there's the ocean currents, right? We talk about the east-west mountain range running to the ocean. It's important to point out how cold that ocean actually is, and then the two together are what make this area, along with the soil, make this area so unique. Not better than anyone else's, but just unique and different. The water current that we have, oh shoot, did I do that? Sorry. The water current that we have actually starts in Japan and goes north, and it comes all the way up to Alaska, and then it kind of eddies right there, and then it comes down the coast of the United States. The water temperature, fluctuates between like 52 and 62 degrees where we are year round. So it's very, very cold. And it's because there's a really deep ocean there. There's not a lot of upwelling of the water. So there's not an ability for the water to get warm. When you're down in Southern California, LA, San Diego, obviously down to Baja California, there's a water current that comes up that coast, and that's a little bit different, a little bit warmer. And that's why you have the palm trees, the sandy beaches, and, the warmer temperatures. But 80% of California's coast is actually from this cold water current that keeps it quite cool. Okay, now we're going to go into this kind of Google map visual starting in space and coming down to where we are. Did I do that right? Oh, shoot. Hold on real quick. Okay, here we go. Hold on. I think I screwed it up. I'm sorry. Anyway, so I'll talk briefly about the soils. The soils are really depleted, well-drained, low nutrient soils, which ironically is what you are kind of looking for when you're talking about going for premium wine grapes, right? You want the vines to work hard. So you got cold, you got sunshine, and you got, poor soils. Anyway, so here we are. Again, just to point out a couple things, you got Japan, you got Alaska, you've got, the West Coast of the United States. And so that water current, goes all the way up and then comes all the way down. This is a situation too, where, there's, this mountain ranges, look at all the mountain ranges here that run north to south, right? Basically everything is running north to south except where we are. We'll get to that in a second, but just look at all the north-south orientations. Also to point out from here specifically, you have these really interesting landmarks. You've got Mount Whitney right there, which is the highest point of all of the contiguous United States. And then just south of that, you have the lowest point, the Mojave Desert, Death Valley. So really interesting kind of dichotomy there. It looks crazy from space. You see that very distinct triangle there, the Mojave Desert. And so the Mojave Desert from where we are currently is only 90 miles as the crow flies. And so, you know how hot it gets there. When you have heat, like it rises, and the hotter it gets, the faster it rises. And so you get this like this kind of situation where you're pulling in the air from where it's cold, and that's what helps create all this wind that we get, which helps keep the temperatures low, which helps keep it sunny. And so that's a really important part that I think gets overlooked a lot. But nonetheless, Mount Whitney, Mojave Desert, and then Santa Rita Hills. So you look at, this is Point Conception. Remember that module that we showed you with the tectonic plate movement, right? Imagine this mountain range right here that's running east to west, used to run north to south when it was next to San Diego 20 million years ago. This is just an interesting kind of viewpoint here where you're looking now down that funnel, looking down that corridor. So if you were, cold air, let's say like fog, wind, you'd be ripping right through here pretty aggressively because there's nothing that blocks you or protects you from that. The town of Lompoc, as a matter of fact, is, offset from the coast because the town, as you get closer to the ocean, it gets, a lot colder, right? So even the town itself was established off the coast because of that wind and because of how cold it is. Moving into the valley here, you've got a really interesting kind of viewpoint where you're now seeing, okay, the western border of the Santa Rita Hills, and now you see the Santa Ynez River kind of snake through there, and then now you see kind of where Melville is and Babcock, and you get to understand like the mountain range that kind of hugs us to the north and to the south, and the Santa Rita Hills are right there in the middle, right there in the foreground. And so if you move in a little bit, you're going to see, this where Anna's block is off to the west or to the left here. We've got 4 pieces of property. This was the original piece that was planted in 97, purchased in 96. We've got block M, you guys are familiar with. You got terraces. Each of those go into their own bottlings. They're a different deal because they have a different elevation, row orientation, different clones, but most significantly is a different soil type. That's where our clay comes from. You got Enox down there at the bottom. That's our Chardonnay, that's stainless steel, no mallow, clone 76, which is really unique. The rest of it is estate Pinot, estate Chardonnay, estate Syrah, super important, but we don't block designate that. And then to the north there is Anna's block, and that's one of the wines we're going to go over, but we wanted to kind of give you guys some orientation before we dig in. And so there's a distinct barn right there, just in the northwest section of Anna's. Old barn, I don't know, was built maybe 80 or 90 years ago. I point that out because there's a cool photo later on to show you guys. But nonetheless, wanted to give you guys this kind of perspective of the West Vineyard planted in 97, and also, this specific block and how it kind of lines up with the rest of our stuff. Going right across the street from here, we've got this vineyard chapel here that we just purchased a couple years ago. It's Pinot Noir Chardonnay planted in 85. And then now we have this Rancho Nuevo piece. And we call it Rancho Nuevo just because we can't think of a better name. But back in the day, it was our new ranch. It was planted in 06, so not that new. But nonetheless, what's really interesting about it is it's actually at a lower elevation than everything else. So that makes it colder. We farm it differently. But also, it's a gradual slope that faces the north. And so that's a really interesting aspect, because we know if you are farming or let's say you're building a house and you want to put your deck out, to capture as much sun as possible, you're going to put the deck out on the south side, right? Whereas on the north side, you're going to get less sunshine, less direct sunshine. So this is a slope that's facing the north. It's a little bit hard to see it here, but just trust us. This mountain that comes up kind of behind us, down, it's gradual slope towards the other vineyard we were just at. It's got a lot of cool or interesting clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. No Syrah is planted there. And the Rancho Nuevo wine that we're going to get into, number two, is a makeup of four of those clones that come from that property. And then now we'll head over to the winery side, which we just refer to as the east side. This was purchased in 97, implanted in 98. And this is where, a good chunk of Pinot Noir comes from, a little bit of our Chardonnay comes from, and the majority of our Syrah comes from. So the black outlined sections here are Syrah blocks. And then one thing to note here too is just how light the soil is. It's like white sand, and you can see from above to the north that kind of, it's all alluvial. So it all came off of that mountain right there and just over time just settled down into this section. It's really deep sand. My brother and I, when we planted this in 98, like we had fun with it and took the backhoe out just to dig, just to see how deep the sand was. And we dug as deep as the backhoe would go, which is crazy to think about. Normally soil has profiles, it has layers, and it has very distinct kind of, whether it be rock, clay, or sand, or a combination of all the above, but this was just pure sand. So this is Donna's block. It sits just south of Sandy's block, which you guys are familiar with too, probably. And it's, we planted the Syrah there on purpose because we wanted to kind of devigorize Syrah as much as we could. And we figured putting it in sand, putting it kind of to the east of that little hill where that cursor is right there would kind of give it enough protection and make it work really, really hard at the same time. And then we're going to taste the high density Syrah, which is right there at the bottom of the screen. And we'll get into that more later, but just to give you guys kind of an idea, you guys have, if you've been to the winery, you've seen this block because it's right where the parking lot is. It's a little bit, unique in that it's meter by meter planted. So every 3 feet is a vine in any direction. So that makes it, different in terms of how you farm it, how you approach it. Shading is an issue, right? So anytime you have a vineyard that's planted in this very dense format, you got to keep it lower to the ground so that it can get enough sunlight, because if it's higher to the ground, then all you're doing is just shading your neighbor, and that's not good. Okay, great. So we'll move on to the wines.
Actually, before we go back, can we answer a question?
Absolutely.
From Troy Bradley said, is there any other influence to Rancho Nuevo than elevation? I don't immediately equate lower elevation to cooler. Am I missing something?
Well, it's two things. I mean, it's the lower elevation. That's where kind of all the cold air drains to. So if the cold air were water, it would go right over this vineyard and drain out to kind of where, it's to the west. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it drains out to the river, the San Ynez River, which is right over there. And then there's the ocean, the town of Lompoc. So the elevation being lower is going to just attract colder temperatures. And then the fact that it faces north is really unique too, because it gets less direct sunlight. And then, the clones, the clonal makeup there is a bit different. So because we planted in 06, which was, 7 or 8 years after we planted the two other vineyards, we learned a lot in terms of, what clones were working, which clones we liked more. And then there was actually a couple new clones that were available for the first time during that era too, that were planted. Rancho Nuevo, clone 943 is an example of that. So I hope that answered the question. So clone, elevation, and exposure to the north. Was there another question?
That's it for now.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's get on to these wines here. We've got this 2022 Anna's just released in your shipment, and was bottled last year, December. it's this really unique set of circumstances because it has a bit more of the sandy loam soil, so a little bit darker. You remember that picture from the Google map of Donna's block and how white that soil is? Well, if you can tell here, I'm holding a clump of this soil in this middle picture. It's definitely darker, so it holds on to a little bit more nutrients. It has a little bit more water holding capacity. Um, and it's two clones that are really quite interesting. You know, clone 114 is a clone, a Dijon clone that doesn't get talked a lot. It's usually 115, which is its sister, but like 114 is planted in four different spots in our vineyard, and we love clone 114, and it just brings out this kind of brambly, kind of darker fruit that has a lot of kind of generosity to it. Whereas you have the other clone, 667, which is kind of the opposite in terms of it being very angular, a bit more tannic, has a little darker fruit profile. But when you put it in the soil and you put it right next to each other, it's really fascinating to see how the two of them kind of work with each other, even though they come from, inherently two different spots of Burgundy. The cluster picture to the left is 667, and you can kind of see, I mean, I don't know if you can tell or if you know any better, but that those are really tiny berries. I mean, we're talking about blueberry size berries there, which is really kind of what Pinot Noir is about. I mean, Pinot Noir is basically translate into a black pine cone. And here, 667, the berries are even smaller, even tighter. And you think about how, from a winemaking perspective, that could be important because of the smaller the berry, then the ratio changes of like liquid to solid. So if you were to take a water balloon and let water out, like it's the same balloon, but now you have less liquid. So it changes the concentration, the density of the actual juice, which, eventually turns into a really dense wine. So when I smell this anise, I get this like, I don't know, like an iodine and orange, like a blood orange peel aroma. There's lots of red fruit here. I'm kind of going after the stuff that's not, or that's less obvious. There's a really unique savory, like salty umami character that I love. Kind of like a oceanic, nori kelpie thing. So there's a good balance here of fruit and savory. Like I don't want wines to just be about fruit. Wines that are just fruit driven are pretty and likable and satisfying, but they don't grab me. They don't make me think. They don't stimulate the brain. They're not wines. They can be translated, at least in my opinion, to be simplistic, right? And so, from a winemaking perspective, I want layers. I want a concentration. I want there to be lots of different aromatics, and that's really where these clones come into play, and also the whole cluster. We put on here, it's 67% whole cluster, which is a lot of stems, and the stems help kind of deliver that savoriness, that salty, the dried herb. I get a like a wild sage aromatic. So it's a cool combination of fruit, savory, salty, even like orange rind fruit. We could go over this too at the end. There'll be a time for questions, but um, I love it. And then texturally, it's dense, it's bright, like it has that acidity like Pinot Noir should have. So it kind of, wakes your mouth up. It gives you this sense of refreshment. At the same time, it delivers this concentration. There's a weight on the mouth. I don't know. It's explosive. It has so many things going on, right? It's mouth watering at the same time. There's enough tannin to kind of sweep it all into the back of the mouth, and you swallow it. I mean, my mouth is watering. It's hard to talk, but like, I want another sip or another bite. Like, it's one of those wines that really kind of delivers on checks all the boxes, if you will. Was there another question? I saw one pop up. Yeah, around this wine.
There is this for the next.
Okay. All right. So that's Anna's. We will now go to Rancho Nuevo. So this is again, we planted some different clones here. 943 is kind of like the main one that really kind of takes the stage just because in '06 it was the very first time that, excuse me, it was available to the wine industry. So up until that point, nobody had 943. So no one really knew a lot about it. We took a little risk on it. We only planted 3 acres of it, not a big deal, but it really has delivered for us, year after year. As a matter of fact, there's been some years that we've actually made a 943 Pinot Noir. Um, anyways, again, this picture to the right, it really gives you this kind of sense of the slope, right? So you're kind of going gradually up that hill. You see that road just kind of lift up a little bit. And then you also have this sandy loam soil. This is a really unique kind of farming situation for us. We've got the cover crop planted there, which helps kind of build up the organic matter, and it helps retain some of the water. It helps, kind of nourish all the microbiology that's going on in the soil. A little bit younger vines, but I get this, in this wine, I always get a lot more kind of like fresh fruitiness to it. And part of that is because I back off a little bit on the whole cluster. It's only 40%. But still, I want you to recognize that, 40% is still very significant. I mean, most Pinot Noir has 0%, right? And then out of the people that are doing whole cluster, they usually float in like a 20, maybe 30%. And so we don't do anything here under 40%. And I'm not saying, oh, we should get credit because we're doing a lot of whole cluster. This is what we believe in. Whole cluster works for us. We love what it does to the wine aromatically, texturally, but also we're farming for it. Like we're out there in the vineyard pulling leaves away from the fruit zone, encouraging sunlight to get onto the clusters and the wind to whip through to kind of harden off that really soft green tissue. It's called lignification. And we get clusters that are lignified, then those are what go into the fermentation process. And if you don't do that, if you use green stems, it can have a tremendously negative effect on the wine, especially a thin-skinned, delicate grape like Pinot Noir. It could turn it into, asparagus, broccoli, like just heavy veggie, right? And you got to be careful. You don't want that. At the same time, if you do it right, then you get this, that savoriness that we've already talked about, that salty, briny, oceanic, dried herb, which, effectively balances out the fruitiness. But here I get a lot more, I don't know, to me, it's more red fruit, more juicy fruit, like more like ripe strawberry and like dark cherry, pomegranate, like ripe cranberry, like crunchy, fresh red fruit. There is an element of savoriness that I do really appreciate, but I also really appreciate this wine for its kind of fruit drive. And I don't know, every year it seems to always kind of be that for me personally. Like if you were to say, oh, what's out of all the Pinot Noirs, like which one kind of is the most fruity consistently or fruit driven, hands down Rancho Nuevo. Texturally too, it still has tannin, it still has grip. There's a little bit of that kind of sandpaper that's there, but it's not overtly tannic. So, if you're talking about, let's say you're making salmon tonight and, you're going to grill it and, you got to pick a wine, out of these two, for me, I would probably go with, the Rancho Nuevo, and I would probably drizzle the kind of reduction sauce on the salmon after you put a little garlic salt on it. And just because like there's that fatty richness of the fish, and then if you can add a little fruit component to it, like that wine is like perfect for salmon. Whereas Anna's would be a little bit more appropriate for, like chicken or pork or even like, a lightly smoked pork shoulder that I just did last night for the crew. So those are the two different wines, and we're going to get into Syrah in a second, but I just wanted to point out that these two Pinot Noirs are also very low production. As you can see, this is 264 cases. I believe Anna's is like 590 something, very small production. And, we do that on purpose. If you go back to that picture of that slide with us punching down everything, it's like, this wine right here was 3 of those fermenters. That's it. Nothing else, right? And so I just want to kind of point out, like, everything's farmed by hand, it's made by hand, and it's punched down, all of the above. And we take a lot of pride in that. And I hope you guys see that and appreciate.
David Schlett had a question. You had mentioned that we farm a little bit differently at Rancho. What's kind of the difference? What adjustments do we have to make for that particular vineyard?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, we farm everything differently, to be honest. And so in Rancho Nuevo, you can kind of see in that picture to the right, the canes that are coming up off of the cordon. That's all cane pruned. And so what we do every year is the new canes that grow, we cut off all of the canes at wintertime except for one. And that one that we keep, we lay down. And then that coming spring, then all those buds that are there on the cane will then pop up and become the new canes. And then the fruit hangs, right off the cordon. And then the following year, again, we'll cut off all of that, leave one cane and lay down the next one. So that's called cane pruning. We just find that given that we do all this pruning in this section last, we do it at the latest point that we possibly can to help avoid the threat of frost. So by cane pruning, it helps delay bud break, or the awakening of the vine, every year too. So you got to consider all these things, and that's one of the things that we do. It's a little differently in Rancho Nuevo.
For both of these Pinots, before we kind of move on to Syrah, what's kind of the recommended aging profile? Should people drink them now? Should they hold on to them for a few years? How are they going to change if they hold on to them?
So I get that question all the time, like, what's the aging potential, or when should I open these wines? And like, the bottom line is, we're not going to release a wine that we didn't believe that was ready to be opened right away, right? So feel free to go for it and open the wines up and enjoy them when they are at this stage, because even though they're considered to be young, but these wines were bottled a year ago. So they spent basically the last year in bottle. The question then is, well, what happens, if I let it, age or cellar it perfectly for 5 years, 10 years? What happens is that kind of fresh fruitiness dries out a little bit. So you take, like, cranberry, like right now in Rancho Nuevo, and then in 5 years, it becomes more of like dried cranberry. So if the question is, will these wines last 20, 30 years? The answer is yes. If the question is, when should I drink it? The answer really is, well, do you want your wines, do you like them to be more fruity, or do you like them to be more savory, right? So as aging occurs, you're going to kind of, enter this, secondary, tertiary flavors and aromas. You're also going to soften the tannins a bit too. So, with Anna's, was a little bit more kind of aggressive, which I like, or maybe I should say assertive with the tannin. That's gonna, like, turn into glycerides over time, right? So it'll soften, become more velvety. So it really just depends on what you want in wine. Like, I opened up for lunch today for the cellar team a 2015 Chateauneuf-du-Pape, Jeunesse of Via Vines. And part of the conversation about that wine was, for me, I love Chateauneuf-du-Pape on the earlier side. I've aged Chateauneuf a lot, and I've tend to be more disappointed with aged Chateauneuf than I am with, earlier Chateauneuf or younger Chateauneuf. So for me, if I'm going to open up Chateauneuf, I'm going to open it up on the earlier side. It doesn't mean that it's, you know, better or worse for anybody, but for me, that's what I prefer. So I hope I answered the question. Okay, we're ready to move to Syrah, specifically Donna's first. Oh, there's Lee. um, so this Donna's block, if you guys remember again that Google Earth image where we came down into Donna's block and how white the soil was and how sandy I talked about it, there's a picture to the far right of really how sandy it is. And that was in the wintertime too. So the soil's a little bit moist. Imagine right now where we haven't had any rain in a long time. You walk in Sandy's block and when you stomp on the ground, like little bits of dust pop up, right? That's how dry and how delicate the soil is. Um, this wine is always made with 100% whole cluster. So all the stems, it's not even a thought. It's not even a discussion, right? It's like when we pick that fruit, it's automatic, 100% whole cluster. The density of the fruit is so present that it actually needs this whole cluster to kind of tighten it up a little bit. And you can't just throw a whole cluster around, haphazardly. You got to be very, fastidious, cognizant of the situation. But every year, Donna's produces really good, high quality, lignified stems. You can kind of see it in Lee's hands if you look closely. Those are typical Syrah clusters. They're a little bit longer, a little bit bigger berry, but the stems are just phenomenal. And so it's always hands down 100% whole cluster. It's 2 clones. Again, we don't usually pick Syrah until the beginning or middle of November. This year it might be a little earlier just because it's a lighter yield, but and the weather's been kind of erratic the past, I don't know, 8 weeks. Both good and bad, but mostly good. And so we might start picking a little bit next week or the week after, but nonetheless, it's always late. Like I've got all my buddies that grow, Syrah in Washington, Oregon, Northern California, in the Rhone Valley, even here, to the east of us in Ballard Canyon and Santa Ynez, Los Olivos, everybody's done with Syrah. As a matter of fact, people are like done, like it's to barrel, put away, done for the season. And we haven't even started. And so it just an example of how cold it is out here and how much on kind of the edge we are of our farming practices and getting things ripe and getting things dialed in. Now, that's really risky what I just described, but the benefit, right, is this, right? When you stick your nose in this Donna Syrah, this is full of lavender and violets and white pepper and black olive and green peppercorn, lots of like boysenberry, blackberry, so kind of darker fruits. Those are all telltales of a cold climate. That's not what you find in, a hot climate like Shiraz or, Napa Valley or whatever hot climate Syrah is. And to be fair, I don't know, 95% of Syrah grown in this world is grown in a hot climate. So this is really unique stuff. This is not normal by any means. As a matter of fact, when I taste, Donna's with, master sommeliers, they always freak out. They're like, where is this from? Oh my God, what's going on? Please explain this to me, right? So you get all those really beautiful lifted aromatics. And then when you take a sip, the other telltale is that acidity. With a cold climate, you're going to retain more acid. If you think about when the grapes are born, they're, after they go through fertilization, they're born with a certain amount of acidity. And then based on the climate that they're grown in, hot, warm, or cold, will dictate how much of that acid is retained and how much of it dissipates, right? So a cold climate is going to have more acidity. So a lower pH, higher acid. And that's really kind of that refreshing part on the mouth. And that's really, again, you take those aromatics, but then now you take the texture And that's what really freaks people out, in a good way. They're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, what is going on here? And it's evident too with the points that we put up here. Like this is the 22, I don't think has any scores out yet, right? But anyways, it's a fun wine. Syrah, people that have a thing about Syrah, like that are really geeky about Syrah, like I am, really find it fascinating. And then there's these people that just they don't really get Syrah, or they think Syrah is cheap or whatever. I don't know, but when they taste it, they're usually blown away by it. Um, so then we'll move on to the last wine for tonight, which is that high density Syrah. Sorry, I could flip the slide. The high density Syrah, which was right by the shoot, I just doubled it. The winery. Um, Sorry, I gotta go back. There's a little delay on my computer. Um, Again, meter by meter planting, right? And the reason why that plays a role here, right? Because people ask, well, people think high density just means like the wine itself is very dense. And yes, it can be, but that's not what we mean. What we mean is the way it's planted. And if you plant lots of vines, or let's say in this case, we doubled the amount of vines per square foot, right? So we're adding double the amount of competition for the sunlight, for the moisture, for the food, for the CO2 gas, for the water. And so what you're talking about is another element of stress, right? So we always talk about our farming practices, kind of in a broad stroke of having a healthy vine in a very stressful, condition, right? And the conditions are, a weak soil, lots of wind, low temperatures. Um, we supplement that by farming, the cover crop and feeding the vines nutrients and doing our thing as farmers. But here's another element of that stress, which is high density. So the idea again, right? From our perspective is if you can get a vine to produce a small amount of really intense fruit, then that's the very first step, right? The very first step of having a mesmerizing wine. Um, and so that's always our goal. Here, because this is a very small section, we don't make a lot of wine. I think this one, we typically make high density Syrah like the 50 to 75 case range. So it's not a lot, just because the vineyard is quite small. It's 0% whole cluster. So here's one of those wines that we don't have any whole cluster in. And so the idea is to really focus in on the 8 different clones here that are fermented together, where normally we always separate everything to fermentant. But the other thing about this wine specifically, it might be obvious, but it's 2017 vintage, right? So here's an example of a wine that that is aged perfectly in our conditions, that we're releasing to you guys, at this time. So you get kind of a jump start on the aging process, which is really fun. And so what is the math on that? So it's 7 years old. Um, you know, it's again, you kind of get a little bit more of like the dried fruit that I was talking about. It's a little bit more kind of leather, a little bit more, like instead of like that black olive tapenade of Donna's, maybe this is like the dried olive, aromatic, because there is still a lot of that kind of olive brininess to it. There's still a really pretty, lifted, peppery thing that's always just, again, telltale cold climate Syrah. And then, there's that acidity and that brightness. The mouth is coating with tannin, and, that's just going to come from that thicker skin, right? Again, the high density pushes the vines to really produce a small berry, very, concentrated. One question that I would ask is, well, why don't you farm everything this way then? Why isn't your whole vineyard farmed in this, 4x3 density? And the reason is because we have to farm this by hand. Like we can't get a tractor in there, right? And the tractors are are really, really important. It still gets, pruned by hand, harvested by hand. Everything does. But in this case, because we can't get the tractor in, we can't rototill it with a tractor. We can't spray it with a tractor. We can't do, a lot of our farming practices in here. And so you could still do it, but then you have to just get different tractors. So if you guys have ever been to like Bordeaux, or Burgundy, or even like in Napa Valley, what's that? Opus One. Opus One has their vineyards are planted this meter by meter, and they have tractors that hover on top of the vines, and so the wheels go in between, but the tractor and the motor and everything is above it. And so if you could do it, it's just you just need different equipment. But nonetheless, we have a small section of this for Syrah. We've got a couple other sections in the vineyard that are high density as well, but this is the high density Syrah. And this is again right in the parking lot. So if you guys have been to the winery, the north facing part of the parking lot is this section. You guys are welcome to walk through it and check it out anytime.
I have a couple questions. One person had asked, which I think you started to talk about in just terms of having the thicker skins, but when we do 100% whole cluster on the Donnas, why are we doing 0% whole cluster on the high density?
So the Donnas is got a slightly bigger berry, and so the solid to liquid ratio is a lot different than in high density. If we did whole cluster with the high density, it would make it even more tannic. Whereas with Donnas, it seems to just be appropriate to have 100% whole cluster with a slightly bigger berry. Does that make sense? I hope that answered the question.
And then Ken Conrad asked, having 8 different clones in such a small area, do they ripen differently? Do we have to treat them differently than one another?
I mean, we're talking about 3 rows of each of the 8 clones, and yes, they do ripen differently, but part of the point of the high density Syrah is to pick it all at once together, and so that it ferments together, right? This is the only wine that we ever do that actually has co-fermenting clones. Otherwise, everything is separated, and then it ferments that way and it goes to barrel that way. This is the only one fermenter every year that is fermented with those clones together. And so we don't take a lot of time in terms of when we sample, if it's like, okay, take 2 clusters from every 3rd row. I mean, it's something similar to that, but it's not quite as crazy as it may sound, but it's picked at once, it's destemmed at once, and it goes into one fermenter all at the same time. Cool. Is there more questions?
And then, so we can open it up for some more questions now. We've got some in the chat already, which is great. So actually, before I stop sharing my screen, I'm going to go back to the map. Because someone asked, well, we have 2. One is a shout out from Marco Martina saying we love the Grenache. Thanks, Marco. We do too. And then someone else asked, where is Caden's block located?
Oh, cool. So, we're kind of facing west right now, or west would be the top of the screen. Come down a little bit more. Yeah. So where the winery is, and you see, if you go to the right a little bit, yeah. So that block that's kind of in the foreground here, that's below Donna's block, and a little bit to the east. If you put your cursor one block above that, Kayleen, right there. So that's the Caden's block. It's got a section of it is Pinot Noir, and then a tiny sliver of it is Syrah. But the section where the Grenache comes from is those first 21 rows right there, coming from the winery down. That's the Caden's block Grenache. We actually picked a little bit of it on Saturday for rosé. As you guys know, the rosé that we do is of Grenache the past, 5 years. And so it all comes from that block. And so this past Saturday, we got 2 tons in for rosé, and it's fantastic. And so, I don't know, the next slug of that may come in a week or 2, probably 2. But nonetheless, the red wine part of the Grenache that we do, that won't come in until probably I don't know, maybe the middle of November, which would be great.
Troy Bradley said he also loves the Cadence Grenache. He said it's exceptional. Thank
No.
you, Troy. And I've got a question for David Schley. He's mentioned, we obviously have the wax on top of our small lot wines. Yeah. What's the reason behind it? What's the best way to avoid making a mess when you're opening it?
Well, the reason, I mean, there's a couple reasons. One is that we just love the look of it. Like it just has that kind of just natural look. We hand dip it in wax, and so it's kind of continuing on the message of everything's done by hand. The color matches, right? The label. So aesthetically, it's beautiful. I love it. And we only do it for the small lots because the other wines, they get the foil capsule and there's a process there that's a lot quicker, easier. But the other thing too is that it essentially lets in less oxygen. Now, having said that, a cork lets in oxygen by design. I mean, it's bark of a tree, right? So you want there to be, there's a process that's important there in aging the wine. You don't want too much, obviously, because that'll oxidize the wine, but there's enough there with cork. And so you play around with different size corks, different lengths and whatever, but by waxing it, you're also kind of, preventing or slowing down that process even more. You want the process, but with kind of our higher end wines, we want them to kind of, last as long as possible, just for the fun of it, really. Because they're more expensive, they're smaller production, like there's all those reasons. And then the best way to open it truthfully is to grab the worm of just your typical corkscrew. Have a nice one, right? I mean, these are nice. If you guys are up here next time you want to purchase them, I think you can get them online too, but these are really well built, right? Don't get those cheap ones, the ones that are $10 at like CVS. They fall apart, and not only that, but you can injure yourself. But essentially what you do, right, is if this was in the bottle and it was wax, is just take the worm and go straight in, and then I pull it up about halfway with this first nodule, and then clear the wax off because it's gonna, break up a little bit. You don't want those pieces to land in the wine. It's a simple process. And then you just pull it out all the way. Don't bother with trying to cut the wax around. You don't need to heat it up and like soften it. This is pretty soft wax. This is a different wax than we used to use in the very beginning. The wax we used in the very beginning was, more of a paraffin, like a harder, thicker, kind of more difficult to kind of get in. And so, that's where you can get injured actually, but it's really quite simple. So the next time you guys have one of these wines to open up, just take the worm, go straight in, pull it up halfway, clean it up, and then pull it out the rest and your money.
We have a question from someone. They received a high density Syrah in their wine club shipment, and they're curious, can they buy more?
Yes, I think we do have a little bit left. I mean, we didn't make a lot, like I said earlier, but there is some still available. And I think the best way to do it is just get a hold of Kayleen and she'll take care of you.
They're online. Actually, I just put some links for everyone in the chat. You can use those links if you liked what you tasted today, or if you're intrigued by something and want to try it. You can order all of these online. If you're members, make sure to log in so that you get your wine club discount. And then we also have a question. Will we also have more Grenache coming?
Yes, so we're gonna, I mean, if everything goes well, we'll be making that wine every year. And when I say if it goes well, it's a little bit hard to predict because we're right on the edge of making it work. In other words, there could be some vintages where it just all goes into rosé. We don't make any red, but so far we've been doing it, and we plan to keep doing it. But even then, the Grenache will only ever be about, I don't know, 150, 200 cases. But I'm really glad you guys dig that wine. There seems to be a lot of kind of attention driven towards that Grenache. I love it too, to be honest. It's really exciting. I mean, it's something that when we decided, because that block was originally planted to Pinot Noir, and then um, we planted it Syrah, and then that's when we sold that Syrah to Jaffers. If you guys remember back then, Jaffers made a Melville Vineyard Santa Rita Hills Syrah. I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And then we ended up ripping it out because it got diseased. And so it sat fallow for 3 years. And then, I convinced my dad that Grenache was a really good varietal to just try. And partly because it goes along the same lines of our mentality of, this Rhone varietal that does really well with whole cluster. That Grenache, by the way, is always 100% whole cluster and neutral wood aged, right? Those are really important things. We're not going to like plant a varietal that doesn't make sense to us. Like it has to fall into our kind of winemaking protocol, if you will. Grenache is one of those varietals that does well with neutral wood and stems, just like Syrah, just like Pinot Noir, but not Cabernet, not Merlot, not, Tannat or Malbec. None of those things are going to do well in neutral wood and whole cluster in a cold climate.
And then for our last question of the evening, someone asked kind of what's coming up in the next wine club shipment. What can we look forward to?
It's a really good question. I know that we always do in the winter, we do Block M and Terraces. And then Kayleen, what are the other two?
Indigent Syrah.
Indigent Syrah.
I think we said in the book.
What?
We said in the book.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're bringing back, we've had some shifting parts and pieces, but we're going to bring back the Vone Romani for winter. That one was really popular, really delicious. We love it. So we're going to be releasing that one as the Monopole exclusive. And then, if anyone who's not Monopole is interested in it, you can always reach out to me. And if we happen to have any left at the end, we're happy to let you have it. And then, of course, the best thing is that, as always, your shipments are customizable. So if there's anything you want more of, or if you want to swap something out, you're really welcome to change it with any current releases. So it's always going to be exactly what you like.
So if you couldn't hear, it's going to be the Pinot Noir Vone Romani from Block C that we've done before. I believe we did it 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be the fourth wine for the winter shipment.
David asked if we're going to do more library wine offerings. Maybe. Stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, we will, right? When we do like that 12 days of...
Yeah, we'll have some in 12 days for sure.
12 days of Melville starting in early December. But you guys, being members, you guys always get the first dibs. You guys get the emails when we release something, from the library. We want you guys to have the first option. And so just, read the emails and there will definitely be, library wines coming down the pipe.
And we have some coming out. We're doing a Halloween promotion mystery pack. So you guys can be on the lookout for that email. That's all from 2011 to 2017 vintages. So there'll be a couple different options. So there's definitely gonna be library wine before we even get to the winter shipment available to you.
That's a good point. So that one's right around the corner, right? All right. Well, thanks you guys for joining and spending the hour with us. Thanks again, Kayleen, for putting this together. It's awesome. Cool presentation. Fun for me too. I love what I do. I love that I get to do this, and I love that you guys love it. So it's super fun for me to share these wines with you guys. And I don't know, because I can't see you guys, so it's kind of weird for me, but I don't know if you guys are drinking them as well and as tonight. And if you are, awesome. Would love, feedback. If you're not, that's cool too. I get it. Like, it's kind of a lot to open up 4 bottles, especially if it's just one of you or 2 of you. But know that if you do want more, Kayleen sent those links. But also just thank you guys, for being members and supporting the business and, being fans. We really appreciate it. And so from all of us, thank you so much for all the support. It's really important and we really appreciate it. Cool.
Mhm.
All right. Kayleen says bye too. And again, thank you guys. And if you guys, like this, we'll probably do it again. We'll do it for each of the shipments and, spread the word and come with more questions. Especially, we try to do this for the people that, can't be here for the pickup parties and, or for whatever reason, maybe you live out of state, whatever. But we'll continue to do this and we hope that you guys will continue to attend. Thank you. Good night, wherever you guys are. Appreciate it. Bye.